to edit.
Happy anniversary, by the way, Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you.
25 years, is that what I saw?
25 years.
I
Awesome.
All right, we're live.
Okay.
Happy anniversary. So
Yay!
happy 25th. So I'm coming up on my 40th, Leslie. So I feel it, but
Good. Yes.
like I tell people, life's a journey and marriage is a roller coaster. You just have to, it's knowing how to hold on, right? So congratulations for holding on for 25.
Yes, and congratulations to you. And I'm going to welcome everyone. Okay, Richard, you've got how many?
35.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Experience Heals. This is a live podcast where we dive into the topic of human experience in healthcare. You're here because this is an important topic to you, I imagine. And we're here for that same reason. This podcast is being brought to us by XM Global Collaborative. XM Global Collaborative exists to foster a dynamic community that empowers leaders worldwide to infuse the human experience into business, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's also a better way of doing business. My name is Leslie Pagel. I am the host of Experience Heals. I've spent my entire career working with organizations on their experience management strategy, and I feel super fortunate to have the opportunity to do that in healthcare over the past 7+ years. I'm currently with experience management consulting firm, Walker Information, working arm in arm with healthcare leaders across the United States. Our time here today is designed to be a conversation. I will be your facilitator. Each month, we'll be looking at human experience in healthcare from different angles. And as your facilitator, I'm going to do the best that I can to ask those important questions, but we ask for your participation as well. You can participate in a variety of ways. Please share any reactions to what you're hearing, thoughts, perspectives in the comments, questions as well. We'll be monitoring the chat area as we go along. And then we're also going to leave some time at the end for just opening up the microphones and having some dialogue as well. And so with that, let's get started. I'm so excited to have Richard Schwartz here with us today. I've been following along in Richard's journey for several years now and am always inspired by the work that he's doing. So Richard, thank you for being here with us.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and same to you. I've been following along, and I love that we finally collided a couple of years back.
Absolutely. Before we dive into the role that experience plays in healthcare, tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard.
Sure. So I've worked in life sciences for coming up on 3 decades. I fell into it kind of by accident as a documentary filmmaker. And then the pharmaceutical company that had hired me to make a film gave me the opportunity to help them reimagine how they interact with patients and how they interact with HCPs. And that's been what I've been doing ever since. And I think it's the realization that these experiences have not only logistical and personal implications, but they have clinical implications, has kind of accelerated the notion of how important this is for people and for businesses alike.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I didn't know that you're a documentary filmmaker, so already learned something new.
Apparently a failed one because, but it got me where I am.
Well, and this concept of storytelling in healthcare is interesting as well. So you have trademarked this phrase, experience as a medicine. what is the background of this? When did this happen? How did you realize the role that experience plays in kind of the healing aspect?
Yeah, it kind of came at me in two ways. It came at me professionally, working in this space, where I was seeing it. So I spent 10 years at WebMD Medscape. I've spent a ton of time on patient engagement and experience programs. Um, and I started to see that we were just getting in people's way. And what blocked me from the realization was honestly a lot of ego, thinking I knew better. And then I got sick. In that moment, you're sitting in a doctor's office, and you hear something you never wanted to hear, and then you hear something you didn't even want to hear, even worse than that. And you have this realization that you just got a full-time job you're going to have for the rest of your life that pays in reverse, for which you're completely unprepared and unqualified. You need an experience. And so all that arrogance washed away with the realization that things are fragile. And I needed to find a team, and I needed to create, and I needed to demand, and I needed to accept and understand the experiences that were unfolding. And so I started to read about it, and I started to understand it. And there's 5,000 peer-reviewed studies that tell us that better experiences equal better outcomes. Period. It's just it seems so obvious when it's easier to get, start, and stay, when it's easier to understand a therapy. Things change, and we give people an advantage against diseases which don't behave fairly and don't operate by rules.
Mm-hmm. So your discovery is through your own personal journey. And
yes, my accelerant,
yeah. So I'm curious to kind of dig into just even the word experience, because I heard you say there's all these peer review studies that show the role that experience plays and things like that. But what is the experience? What does that mean to you in the context of healthcare, of course?
Yeah, I think I call it the algebra of experience. I think it's a pretty simple equation. We all enter into any given circumstance with expectations. And those expectations, plus or minus the realities, that's your experience. That's your lived experience, period. It's that simple. It's that crass. Now, to continue on with the algebra metaphor, if we're sitting there as the brand, as the company, and we begin to understand what people's expectations were and where we met them and where we didn't meet them, that experience divided by the actions that you take against it to solve for it, and then multiplied by the impact of those actions, that is where customer experience starts to show benefits for people and for businesses.
So you look at experiences as relative to expectation, like the experience is driven by an expectation.
I've got to take it back to the most important person in the equation, which we can call them customer. I'm not so sure if when I'm in the health system, I'm a customer, but for lack of a better word, or a physician or a clinician who might be prescribing a medication, because I focus primarily on life sciences or a diagnostic. They have expectations. They don't expect it. Well, sometimes they don't expect it to be hard and crappy and difficult, but it is. I mean, look, if 100 people go out and get a prescription for a medication, only about 75 of them are going to fill it. Only about 75. That's a pretty massive drop off. And as you start to go down the chain, that by the time we get to a refill, by the time we get to 6 months, we're down to 30 or 40 people. And this is a medicine. This is a prescription, not a subscription. We're talking about a medicine, not a magazine. That's broken. That's broken for patients and it's broken for business. We could stop making medicine today, period. We could stop. I don't advocate that we do it, but we could stop making new medicines today and just take the ones we have in the manner in which we're supposed to, and our life expectancy would go up. We don't do what we're supposed to do. One, because we're humans. But we're predictable. We're unpredictable in very predictable ways.
Okay. So I'm hearing that experiences are relative to expectations, and we all have expectations. And the problem is that we're all humans, and as a human, we're irrational, and we don't always do what we're supposed to or should be doing in the context. So when we think about the role of adjusting that, solving for that problem, where do you start in terms of thinking about the experiences that you can create? How do you create these experiences, I guess, that meet expectation? Maybe that's the root of the question.
I think it's understanding the expectations, right?
Okay.
And I like to start at the end. I like to start with and I sit down with a customer, I sit down with a company. I think about with them, what's a case study that we want to present in 12 to 18 months? What is it? Let's write it. As a matter of fact, let's just write it. Like I worked with one life sciences company. I said, imagine that this is going to be in our annual report in a year from now, in 2 years from now. How about we write what it would say? And then we can design toward that. But we're sitting in a room by ourselves without the customer. We need to validate that with the customer. We need to validate that there's an intersection between what they need and what they want, and what we need and what we want. And people look at pharma, and I work in pharma, and they talk about it as being evil, and it is one of the least trusted industries that are out there. But I've yet to meet the person in the industry that's evil and just wants to be a disease monger. Everybody that I meet, everybody I intersect with, deeply cares about the patient. So it's starting with understanding what the patient, the most important person in the room, needs and wants, and their outcomes.
So how do you do that?
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to gather information and to gather insights, talking to and listening to and observing people, period. There's flaws in a lot of the ways that we collect data. Surveys are inherent with bias. Somebody says to me, we want our net promoter score to be higher. I'm like, great, I can do that for you inside of a few days. It just depends on what we ask, when we ask, and how we ask, right? But they're still important tools to survey. I prefer we do it in ways that might not be as traditional, in ways that might not be what people are expecting or seeing today. And I also think we should observe and listen to people and understand what their lived journeys are. The data is out there. The data, when people intersect with us and collide with the other constituents in healthcare, are out there. We're just not mining it in the proper ways. The data sits inside of contact centers. It sits inside of how people visit your owned and operated. It sits in how they intersect with third parties.
So is it a matter of, because what I hear there is that, yeah, surveys play a role. And I think that tends to be where we turn to answer the question of how do you keep your finger on the pulse of the experience or expectations, but it's not the end all be all. And that oftentimes the data is already within a business locked up somewhere in a contact center or in sales records or, whatnot. And it's about unlocking that data to help us understand the lived experience as well.
Yeah, it's the difference between the known and the knowable, right? And a lot of times, and I'll just speak about the industry I focus on in life sciences. We look at operational metrics. We look at clicks and visits and views and downloads and how many times the rep was in the doctor's office. And then we we map that back to financial. We map that back to an increase
Mhm.
in prescribing, and I think there's some consensual hallucination that happens there between the business and their ad agencies in terms of, did that actually happen? And what
Yeah.
the cause? The knowable data, like, we decide with our hearts and we justify with our wallets. So why aren't we understanding sentiment? There's data from DT Consulting that I love that talks about what drives a physician to prescribe a certain medication. And 50% of that is what you would expect. It's safety,
Mhm.
efficacy, it's the clinical data. 35% of that is actually the customer experience, the experience they have with the
Mhm.
content, the medication, with the field representatives they're working with. And we spend the preponderance of our budget on the 50%, the safety and efficacy and thumping our chests, and not very much money on the 35%. And if science is on everybody's side, you have two drugs that are equally as safe and equally as efficacious and equal in cost. Your competitive advantage is in the experience. Are you simply more helpful?
Mhm.
Period. It comes down to that.
Yeah. Well, and some of what I hear you talking about came up in our first episode of Experience Heals last month, where Sparky Whitty was talking about that basically our perception is our reality, and it doesn't really matter what the reality is, it just matters what the perception is. And I think that this is similar to this kind of understanding of expectations. And what I heard you say is that oftentimes we get stuck in like measuring the reality of things and not necessarily understanding the perception side of it. So we're measuring clicks, downloads, views. Well, that's the reality, but we don't understand what's the perception behind that from the patient perspective.
Was it helpful? Simply, was it helpful? Did it ease my path to get, start, and stay? And I look at it from more than one dimension. I don't just look at it from the clinical dimension. I look at it from the behavioral and the financial and the logistical dimension. Like, if you look at something like clinical trials, when a trial is delayed, it delays people's opportunities to access a new medication. It also hits the bottom line of the manufacturer to the tune of about $1 million a day in lost revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And trials are delayed oftentimes largely because of clinical issues, but a lot of those clinical issues are born out of and surrounded by logistical ones. If we could just understand it better.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, I mean, I see a comment here in the chat, and I'm not exactly sure if you want to rephrase if there's a question, but I deeply believe that outcomes are tied to experiences, period.
Mm-hmm.
The clinical outcomes and the business outcomes are tied directly to experiences. And we are seeing it time and time again. You can look at the work of Dr. Alia Crum in The Treatment Effect out of Stanford University. You can just open up Compassionomics by Drs. Tresiak and Mazzarelli and turn to any page, and the experiences are directly linked to outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So can you share some of that? So how do you see healthcare companies using experience as medicine? What are they doing today?
You know, it's interesting. In the US in particular, so in two countries, we're allowed to do DTC advertising. We're allowed to do it in the US and we're allowed to do it in New Zealand in the industry. The US is 5% of the global population, but probably on average about 42% of any given pharmaceutical manufacturer's revenues.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've gotten tangled up in is pretty intensive advertising, pretty intensive wars on TV and in magazine and digitally. But what I'm starting to see is those brands understanding and shifting some spend to truly understanding the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to do awareness. I'm not saying don't do awareness, but what I am starting to see is them understanding the effectiveness and the value of the resources. It's, if we don't do that, it's how we end up with people dancing about diabetes and singing about psoriasis, and we've got too much of that. So I am seeing brands and very big brands start to lean in not on just market research, not on, a room full of people and asking some questions, but on some of the deep data on how people are behaving and perceiving what it's like to have cancer, what it's like to have heart disease, what it's like to be obese, and what do I need on a logistical, personal, and experiential level, not just on a clinical level.
Yeah. So, but how are they, so I hear that you're seeing a shift, not moving away from creating awareness with marketing, keeping that, but adding on a deep understanding of the patient, the condition, and things like that. But how are they using that understanding to create an experience that heals?
Yeah, well, the patient breaks ties, right? And if you understand what is the friction between me when I get a prescription, toward understanding it, filling it, and taking it, we're in a battle against a system. And look at something like prior authorization. And prior authorization is what you need to go through to get a specialty medication. And physicians report care delays, physicians report outcomes, patients report frustration in that. When we understand that and we start to simplify that process for the back office, the doctor, and for the patient on the front lines, and people can access their medication, we're removing one of the core barriers to access. That doesn't mean they're going to take it. Them taking it and continuing to take it in the right way requires us to understand what it is that they need on a psychosocial level, on a personal level, on a logistical level. So I'm seeing companies digging deeper in on understanding what it's like to be a person who needs a medicine and what's in between them and taking the medicine. And can I help? Can I create better, more meaningful content? Can I create better, more meaningful resources? Can I simply get out of the way?
Yeah. Well, and I see a comment in here about the patient advocate and feeling like there's an opportunity for patient advocates to be there during and through the journey. Is that an example of experience, like creating experiences as medicine?
Yeah. I mean, what advocates do is the difference between great outcomes and poor outcomes. And why not? If we have $100 in marketing budget and we're going to put it to 1 month sooner and not 1 month longer on the medication as the preponderance of our spend, as the bolus of our spend, then we might have a problem. We should be shifting some of that time and those money, and perhaps people like, or solutions like, that behave like an advocate. And I'll just give an example. Somebody very close to me was diagnosed with a pretty rough type of cancer, and they were just hitting walls after walls after walls. And I shifted from being, a family member to being their advocate. And by the end of it, suddenly there was a grant that allowed them to live at the hospital in a high rise just adjacent to the hospital and walk to their weekly therapy and not have to drive 2 hours. And it made all the difference. So having that advocate virtually, having that advocate terrestrially, realistically, and we're looking at the advent of agentic AI, where we can deploy sentinels to solve problems for people at scale. That's a wonderful thing. Seeing it come to fruition as a reality in a place as complex as healthcare is going to be a little bit tougher, but we don't have enough advocates to go around. So can we create them in the aggregate? Can we create them through agentics?
Real quick for the audience, what is agentics AI?
Oh, so agentic AI are autonomous sentinels. So in the case of prior authorization, an example would be a prescription gets written and the agent is deployed immediately to advocate for that patient, to file the paperwork. And so instead of it taking weeks, the agent goes to work. The agent can understand if the insurance company rejects it for one reason or another, if there's an appeal that's necessary, and deploy and address the appeal, so that we're not having humans spend time not smiling and dialing to get that done. And the wait time is solved by an intelligent and autonomous sentinel.
Okay.
We're seeing those show up through the likes of Salesforce Life Sciences Cloud. I am seeing a lot of people touting things as agentic solutions that are not autonomous. They're smart chatbots, but they're not autonomous. So I have a very critical eye out on whether or not these AI technologies are indeed autonomous, with humans in the back end understanding the rules of what needs to happen.
Yeah. So is it safe to describe that as that there's AI working in the background to help advance that patient situation on the patient and payers' behalf and providers' behalf?
Yeah, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but we can. And like, look, in the case of agentic AI, if an agent is gone out, an intelligent and autonomous sentinel has gone out to solve a problem for a human that is clear and understood, I don't ever need to survey anybody. As a matter of fact, the problems with experiences get more beautiful as they become more invisible. And that's really hard for experienced professionals to look at, because we want to take credit for finding it and fixing it and go, look what we found and look what we fixed. But man, what if we could just make them invisible? What if it never happened? What if it never happened is kind of a great aspiration of mine. But I know it's far reaching, and I know problems are going to happen no matter what. But gosh, if we set our sights on making it more beautiful by making it more invisible, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what healthcare is doing to use experience as a medicine. What are some of the gaps in healthcare as it relates to experience as medicine? And maybe a different way of asking this is like, where are we getting it wrong?
Yeah, score chasing scores. And I don't think I'm not beating up on Net Promoter Score. But one company's increased NPS and how it connected back to clinician sentiment, patient outcomes, showing me that your NPS went from X to Y because of your surveys. That's kind of aged like milk in a lot of ways. I think we're getting that wrong by chasing those scores. I'm not saying we don't need scores. I'm not saying we shouldn't measure effort and we shouldn't measure satisfaction. But Tom's on, and in Tom and Wayne's book on customer experience, the customer experience enterprise, they have a whole chapter devoted to the very notion of being more helpful. How about we just do that? How about we understand the gaps in where we are and are not helpful, and we close those gaps and we measure what that means? So maybe there's a score tied to it. Maybe there's NPS like and CES scores tied to it. But I see so many companies in life sciences get caught up in the scores, not in the actions. And none of this means a darn thing until you take an action and you measure the impact and the value of that action for a human.
Yeah. So let's take this. I want to take this kind of problem and explore it in a couple ways. One is, what I hear is, if we need the scores, they serve a purpose, we should still do it, but it's the fixation on score tracking as opposed to having a fixation on helpfulness. Yeah. How do you start to chip away at that? How do you start getting an organization to stop being so fixated on the score and start really focusing on being more helpful?
Yeah, what does it mean? What does the score even mean, and what did you do about it? So if you found out as a lagging indicator that there's an effort problem or there's a satisfaction problem, one, we're probably a month down the road, and that patient may have disappeared, or that physician may have prescribed something else because it was too challenging. Being more nimble, moving faster, gathering that insight and acting on that insight on segments of one, we should still look at the outer loop. We should still look at root cause. But I can only imagine that a lot of patients are experiencing the same challenges as our physicians. So it's as simple as taking action on what we understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is Tom under the XM Global, but saying empathy and compassion are noticeably absent in our relationship with customers.
Yep.
Viewing the journey as a cognitive and rational experience, which has been expedited by the fixation of CSAT and NPS scores rather than the desired emotional states and outcomes.
See, he said it much more directly than I did. Yeah, I think that is it, right. It is a fixation, and why? I've met with companies, Leslie, that we sit down, and I've actually had people say to me, "Well, our bonuses are tied to this score.
Mm-hmm.
You should stop that. Like, you should stop that right now." They worry about punishing problems and getting feedback instead of rewarding resolution. And if your bonus is tied to the score, I can guarantee you human nature is going to mess it up really badly. Yeah. Well, you know what? Tie their bonus to rewarding resolution. Tie their bonus.
Well, I was just going to say, just yesterday, I was looking at some research with physicians on engagement with a dashboard that was based on survey data. And one of their feedbacks was around compensation and the preference for being, not compensation, but the preference for being incentivized on patient engagement as opposed to an absolute score. How am I engaging in this data, this voice of the patient, as opposed to, what the number is?
Yeah, and if we look on the healthcare professional side of the equation, and we look at the stress that they're under, the Physicians Foundation study is a biannual study. It's about 7,000 and then about 7,000 USMDs. And they've asked a question year over year, and that question has been, what's the most satisfying part of being a doctor? Now, these are arguably some of our best and brightest in society, people that go into this, and they go into it as a calling. And the questions that they ask are, is it collegial collaboration, scientific curiosity, prestige, money, or my relationship with patients? Year over year, the number one most satisfying part of becoming a doctor is their relationship with patients. And these people work in a system that conspires against their aspiration. So I don't blame them. I have, I guess it's not the right word, but I've left or fired physicians before who were interrupting the whole time, who were not leaning in and truly wanting to understand who is this person in the room. And it's what Hippocrates said. It's more important to understand the person with the disease than what disease the person has.
Yeah. I actually had a good friend opt out of the medical route for curing her cancer because she said they're not looking at the whole person. They're just looking at the cancer. And the reality is that in order to cure this cancer, we have to look at the whole person. And so she's on a journey to cure herself. We saw
it in David Feigenbaum's book, Finding My Cure, where he had to create his own experience. And that's tough. That's tough to become your advocate. That's tough to do. If everybody in the system is just trying to figure out how can we be more helpful, and isn't that wonderful? Right. I mean, if that's not wonderful, I'm not sure what is. But yeah, to your point, in the comments around the desired emotional state and the felt emotions, I'll just go back to what drives our decisions. And we like to think it's rational. We like to think it's things we read and things we understand and things we believe. But the lizard brain tells us it's largely emotional. It's largely emotional, and we can rationalize any way we want. And if you get an email from me, at the bottom of it is the quote from David Augsburger, the Anabaptist minister, that says being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, the two are indistinguishable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you break that down and you think about it, man, it's just such a beautiful truth.
Yeah.
And it is a moral beauty, and moral beauty is what inspires awe. And moral beauty often comes from one person doing something on behalf of another person.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And it's why we're here. We've survived as a species. And Tom and Wayne will tell you this, simply because of reciprocity. If there was no reciprocity, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Real quick, I do want to just add the disclaimer on my girlfriend's situation that I'm not advocating for that, but it's just an example of of the experience as well. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what we're getting wrong and probed into, how do you create this bridge from score tracking, obsession with score tracking, to kind of appeal with having that focus more being on helpfulness. I'm imagining there are other people that are listening or will listen to this who are like me and are saying, okay, I have this survey instrument. Can I use it as a tool to help create this shift? And so that would be the first question. Can you? And if so, what advice do you have for that person?
Yeah, well, if you want to find out if you're being helpful, I wouldn't start out by asking, "Are you helpful?" It's like if you want to find out if you're trusted, I wouldn't go, "Hey, do you trust me?" I would look at the dimensions of it. What are the dimensions around clarity? What are the dimensions around proximity? What are the dimensions around speed that would indicate and comprehensiveness and completion that you are being more helpful? And I would start with that. And if you're going to use a survey vehicle to do that, I would begin to understand from the customer's perspective what those dimensions are.
Yeah.
What are the dimensions of trustworthiness? What are the dimensions of helpfulness? I have my opinions on what they are, but I think you have to look at your organization, you have to look at your product, and you have to look at your customer very carefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. So take these concepts of trust and helpfulness and define what they mean for your patients, for your customers in life sciences, and then start focusing on those as a measurement in your survey.
And I also believe that the feedback that you get should be a curiosity factory for you. So if you get a piece of feedback, a trend in close-ended, or some feedback inside of open-ended, the 5 whys. Why did they say that? Well, they said that because of this. Well, why is that happening? Use it as a curiosity engine. Use it to inform and infuse into your content. And I think taking on a deep belief that the experience has clinical implications matters in the pharmaceutical industry. I think it matters in the healthcare industry. My doctors got their back to me. I'm not that confident. And I had the actual experience where one physician prescribed me a medicine specialist, and basically you were looking at the EMR the whole time, said, "All right, I wrote you a prescription. Just start taking it. I'll see you back in about 6 weeks." I walked out of there like, well, that was a big nothing burger. And I didn't do it. And then I saw my primary, and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Hey, we've got this. You and I have got this. I need you to start taking this." Guess what? Same prescription, different experience. I took it.
Right.
And I got better simply because I felt like she cared. And I often say to companies that your customer experience platform needs GAS, and GAS is an acronym for gives a sh. You need to show that you give a sh.
Yeah. I like that acronym. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, that's one of my richisms, and I believe it to be true. I need people working on this that actually care. When I work on patient experience, one of the first things I do when I work with a new team is I say, "Okay, I need everybody to take 2 hours over the next week and watch the movie I, Daniel Blake." And if you haven't watched it, go watch it.
Okay.
It's about the human experience inside of healthcare. It's filmed in Northern England, so put subtitles
Can
on.
you say that again? What is it?
Daniel Blake.
Daniel Blake.
Hi, Daniel Blake. Watch it this weekend. Message me if it
Okay,
changes
yeah.
the world. It's an absolutely heart-wrenching yet beautiful and poignant film about the human experience inside of healthcare. And you can see, I won't ruin it for anybody, but you can see that had things been handled a bit differently, had there been more helpfulness, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, it's a gift of a film. Yeah, I just looked down and I've got a book sitting on my desk, and I didn't realize it was sitting here, but this is a book called A Call to Action, and it was written by the former CEO of Pfizer. And in it, he said that, if we were going to have a seat at the table, we needed to listen differently. We needed to act differently. We needed to behave differently. And it's just such an important notion to start to understand, like, that the industry needs to show up differently. The problem with acting differently, partnering differently, and communicating differently is that this book was written in 2005.
Can you show the book again? I got disconnected for a little bit. A Call to Action. Okay.
So it was written in 2005, and this isn't about Pfizer at all. They've done amazing things in customer experience. It's not about them at all. It's about the notion that we get sucked into the gravitational pull of what's safe and familiar as an industry. So yeah, we're going to communicate differently. We're going to act differently. We're going to behave differently. Well, until the customer voice is ever present, until customers break ties and not the highest paid person's opinion, we'll be in that same loop for another 20 years. I don't want to have the same conversation in 2045. I probably won't be here, but I don't want people having that same conversation in 2045. The way to act differently and partner differently and communicate differently as an industry and get a seat at the table is to sit at the table where the people that matter most are. And that's the kitchen table. That's the kitchen table of the patient. That is the table at the P&T committee. That's the table in the oncology board where they're making important decisions, and being there and understanding what their barriers are and where we can just show up as more helpful. I deeply believe, and I write about it all the time, the pharmaceutical industry has given me the life I have. It's given me the wife I have. I met my wife in the industry. And I deeply believe that this is an industry that manufactures miracles. We change the course of disease and damage and illness and injury in the human body. A lot of us wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the stuff that comes in these. We wouldn't be here today. We need to start wrapping the experiences that surround our miraculous products as beautifully as we do in creating them. Period. We just do. And we're not. We're getting caught in that gravitational pull of more messages and more marketing and more TV ads and more noise in the doctor's office. I'm not saying stop marketing. I'm starting to say be a conscientious capitalist and listen to people. Sorry for the rant, but
no, that's all right. I do want to shift gears and also open it up for some Q&A. So one question before we do that, if someone is listening and saying, okay, I've got to start, where do I get started in bringing the experience to a higher level, to a healing level?
Yeah. Check your ego at the door. First of all, you don't know everything. If you've not lived the journey of caring for someone who's ill as a practitioner or as a caregiver, if you've not lived the journey as a patient, put your ego aside. Bring them into the equation. Listen to them. Understand where you are intersecting with them. Understand their needs. Open yourself up to system thinking. Understanding all the things that are surrounding the barriers to get start and stay, not just the ones that are in your purview. This industry is, we break each other's experiences. Payers break the system and break pharma, and pharma breaks the payer and the system's experiences all the time. So we need to think about it as a system. It is a boil the ocean problem, but check your ego at the door. And listen.
Yeah. Well, I love this. I love the concept of check the ego at the door. And then the other visual that you created is bringing people together around the kitchen table, and I think there is a little bit of checking the ego at the door to do that, to say this isn't about the boardroom. This is about the kitchen table and, the human beings that are surrounding it and creating that space for that conversation, for listening.
Yeah. And, we talk about empathy a lot. And I love inside of the book, Compassionomics, the comparator, like empathy is great. We need to be empathetic. We have to be empathetic, but compassion denotes taking an action. So I would orient myself around action. Mm-hmm. And it's not a subtle difference between those two words. Have empathy, but act on it. Like act on what you hear. Be committed to action. Be committed to relentless resolution.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I would love to open it up for other questions from our guests here today. What questions do you have? And you can come off mute. I think I'm pretty sure Tom would say yes, you can come off mute to ask your questions, or if you want to put them into the chat, we can moderate that way as well.
And I've always got questions, Richard. So I'll start out. Maybe I can prime the pump here a little bit.
Sure.
In our industry, we talk about empathy all the time, but to your point, rarely does it get operationalized into passion. I don't know if it's a matter of it gets siloed in insights or it gets siloed in human-centered design. But what do you think explains for that? Why, we beat our chest and talk about how we put ourselves in the shoes of our customers, but then why is it that doesn't always translate into compassion?
I think what does it is oftentimes the ethos and the culture. I believe, whose job is it? Whose job is it to take action? Whoever acts on it owns the customer experience. I don't care whose job it is. Act on it. And if you're inhibited from acting on it in some way, then you're not doing customer experience. You're collecting survey data. You're chasing scores. Act on it. Everybody's job should be relentless resolution. Otherwise, you have no return on experience. You have nothing to measure. You have nothing to measure other than a score. So I think it's the organizational culture of relentless resolution on acting on it and empowering people to take action. When I look at the pharmaceutical sales rep, the companies that are doing this the best, the absolute best, and are seeing value from it, are not just looking at the feedback from the physician, they're looking at the feedback from the rep, and they have a social contract with that representative that you're not going to get punished for problems, but you are going to get rewarded for resolution. Close the loop, act on it. You own it. It's your business. It's your customer. Act on it. And if anything gets in your way, let us know. Those companies are doing really well because they are built to act. They are designed to act, and action is the mandate.
So I want to add on to that, because how do you create that culture? What is in place in those organizations that that end up with this, bias for action?
Well, it's top down for sure, and it's bottom up. It is including the people that need to take action and support the action and all the regulatory framework. I know we sit inside of a regulated industry, so all that is a given. We need to behave compliantly, but it's cultural. It's cultural, and it is an understanding, and it comes from the top and it comes from the bottom, that we are an organization of action. A lot of times when I enter into an effort with a company, I start with intention. I ask them very clearly, what is your intention? Why are you gathering feedback? Why are you observing feedback? Why are you asking people for feedback? What do you intend to do with it? And they'll tell me, we intend to learn more and we intend to do this. Okay, you intend to do more. You intend to take action on it. How will your audience know? Why isn't that part of your communication? Why isn't it in your annual report? This is what we did. This is what we set out to do. We wanted to listen. We wanted to understand. We wanted to take action. I think it should sit right between sustainability and DEI inside of your annual report, period. We listened, we understood, we acted, and here's what it resulted in. State your intent, be clear on your intent, communicate your intent to your customers and your colleagues and your entire company. Then it's cultural. If you're not clear on your intent, on why you're listening, or if you're vague on your intent as to why you're listening and what you intend to do about it, then it's probably going to flounder and it's probably going to fail. And this is a roll up your sleeves from the C-suite now.
Mm. So who might be, and what organization might we look to as a role model of this? Is there one that comes to mind for you?
I don't want to call a particular organization out, just because I don't have permission fully to do it. But I have seen, and I'm working with companies that are acting in this way and are doing these things. And those are the companies that are leading and that are seeing a return on experience. The companies that are listening to their field and understanding where the reps are challenged, where they need better resources, where the medical science liaisons are challenged, where the conference data isn't resonating with doctors inside of those settings, and acting on it, and then communicating back to physicians and patients. This is what we heard, this is what we understood, and this is what we did. Those are the companies that are leading.
Yeah.
There's
awesome.
there's a handful. There's pockets of brilliance, right? And then there I'm also seeing where we get lost in starting with tool sets, starting with technology before we've thought about what are our mindsets and what are our skill sets. What is it we're trying to change? What is it we're trying to rapidly and quickly change for the people that we care about the most? And do we have the core skill sets to do that? Only then, I think, can you start to select partners who either fill your gaps for your skill set and who are aligned with you on your mindset, because otherwise you're just, the highway to hell is littered with tech debt. You're just going to have more tech debt. And you're going to get really frustrated, and you're going to look at, the technology that you bought, and you're going to chalk it up to a failure. And that hurts all the other technologies out there. It hurts you if you're a tech vendor, and it hurts everybody that's trying to do what you're doing. So stop it. Stop doing that. Don't lead with the tech, lead with the mindset and the skill sets.
Yeah, love that. Any other questions?
Don't come at them all at once. I have a question. Why do you think it seems really obvious? Oh, wait, here's a question. Not naming companies, but what damage do you feel has been caused by survey companies selling CX platform for designing CX and its ownership? Yeah, I'm not going to name any companies. I think everybody's belief that there's a magic bullet in the ones and zeros, right? If you buy the technology, if you buy it and you think about it as binary alone, that deploying a technology and building a platform and having a dashboard is going to solve a single one of your problems, then I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. I think it's not ones and zeros. I think it's X's and O's. And if you don't start with the X's and O's and how deeply I care about my customer and their success and their outcomes, you've just spent good money after bad. If you're not ready to buy it, if you're not ready to operationalize it, you don't have the skill sets to act on it, then don't buy it yet. And I think the companies should lean in more on ensuring their customers are ready to buy it. And there's the tyranny of the quarter. These companies are public companies, or they're companies that, are owned by private equity who, they want their coffers filled and they have expectations. So the tyranny of the quarter can drive some bad behaviors.
Yeah.
I would just encourage that you look at the long term.
Yeah.
The customer and let that be your ethos. behind why you're doing it.
Well, and I will, I'll pick up on Tom's comment here about the damage and just do a plug for XM Global Collaborative, because this collaborative was created as a way of bringing practitioners together to elevate the role of the human experience in whatever industry, not just healthcare, but obviously technology plays a role in enabling. It's more like an enablement. It is an enabler. So there's absolutely a responsibility and an opportunity for the technology, but as practitioners of the experience in our business, we have an opportunity to come together through the collaborative to work alongside each other, to support each other, to learn, share, grow, and really have a bias for action as a community, but then also use that within our organizations to move the needle as well.
Yeah, there's a semantic regression of the term customer experience that people will use it to conveniently fit into what their role and how they make money. And I think what you just shared there is, about the human experience is so important to keep in mind, and not look, I have no problem if customer experience is aligned to marketing. I think it's wonderful to inform marketing. I have a problem when it's used to validate it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we go sideways, and that's the semantic regression I talked about. So having these conversations as a community is really important.
Yeah. And grateful for the collaborative for creating that. Richard, thank you very much for joining us on Experience Heals. I'm walking away feeling inspired, but also, considering and reflecting on what can I do to have a bias for action and a relentless pursuit of being helpful within the healthcare organization, because I see it every day, the opportunity to use experience as a way of helping humans heal, whether it's the human beings in the workforce or the human beings that we're serving through the healthcare industry. So I appreciate you being here and being with us. And thank you to XM Global Collaborative for providing this venue for us.
Thank you so much. It's not about what keeps you up at night. It's about what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Love that. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Bye-bye.